Thousands of people rallied in Washington last month to protest the recent killings of unarmed black males. We'll talk with a Detroiter who took part in the March for Justice. Plus, heart disease has taken a terrible toll on African American women. We'll tell you what you need to know about this deadly disease. Stay right there.
At DTE Energy, we believe that we have a greater responsibility. We believe that being part of a community means being involved in the fabric of that community, investing time, effort, and resources in the communities we serve. DTE Energy Foundation is a proud sponsor of American Black Journal.
Welcome to American Black Journal. I'm Stephen Henderson. As the nation pauses to honor the birthday of the late Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., we can't help but wonder what Dr. King would think about the state of civil rights today, nearly 47 years after his untimely death. Last month, thousands of people converged on Washington, D.C. for the Justice for All March, reminiscent of Dr. King's civil rights marches in the 1960s. People of all races and backgrounds walked to protest the lack of indictments in the killing of unarmed black men by white police officers and to proclaim that Black Lives Matter. The event was organized by Reverend Al Sharpton and the National Action Network. Several busloads of people from the Detroit area took part in the demonstration. Joining me now to talk about his experience at the march is Stephen Singleton, who's the pastoral minister with the Archdiocese of Detroit. Welcome back to American Black Journal.
Oh, thank you.
And welcome back to Detroit from Washington, where I'm sure this march was a really moving experience.
It truly was. It was important for us to come together in solidarity to the right for justice for all black men. And in doing that, I wanted to make sure that I was a part.
Yeah. And so tell me about some of the people who went with you. You're a member of the clergy. There had to be other religious figures there too, but ordinary folks as well.
Yes, Reverend Williams, he went and...
Reverend Charles Williams, yeah.
Reverend Charles Williams, he is the president of the local chapter.
Of the local National Action Network, sure.
And he summoned all ministers to join him and allowing us to go there and try to make a difference, try to sow force, try to sow solidarity.
Yeah. I mean, these incidents certainly got lots of people's attention last year to the point where Black Lives Matter became, I think, one of the most popular memes on Twitter. There was a hashtag that was everywhere. This idea, though, that black people and black males in particular are sort of under siege from police officers who do not respect the idea of restraint or respect. That's really pushing us backward, it seems, in the civil rights discussion in this country. It does seem somewhat like we are back in the 60s where violence was regularly visited on African Americans.
Yes, and that's correct. Back in 63, I wasn't old enough to be a part of that.
I wasn't alive yet.
But I knew that it was very important because of the mere fact that the history that I understood was coming back again.
Yeah.
And I wanted to do whatever I possibly could to eliminate that. I know that black lives didn't matter then, and we're visiting that whole same thing even today.
Right.
I call it a modern day lynching.
Yeah, I mean, there's no way you can look at these incidents, Ferguson, the Eric Garner killing in New York, the Tamir Rice killing in Cleveland, which there was a new video out last week showing the police response after this young man was shot by the police and lay there dying. Just the callousness that came across in that video, I think, was shocking to a lot of people. I think we like to believe that we have moved significantly past that point in our history.
But we haven't. And that's the reason why the march went on, and that's the reason why it was important for us to come together. There was a lot of people there, a lot of people from all over the state and in the area of the United States came in solidarity to march and show their support. One of the people that comes to mind was Spike Lee. He was very dedicated and determined to be a part, not necessarily be on the dais, but be a part of the march.
Of just the march.
Yes,
Right.
along with his daughter. And so it was important that he wanted to show his support for all of America. Right. And he carried a flag because he believed that this is still America and we still should be able to live like Americans.
Right, right. And that's one of the really important points here is this march is not saying, you know, America is a bad place or a place that we don't want to be part of. It's that we do want to be part of. We want our rights to be recognized the same as everybody else. We want to be treated like other Americans expect to be treated, especially by the police.
And that is correct, and that's one of the things that we had hoped to accomplish, to show the solidarity that we are not going to stand for this, you know. And it wasn't just people of color. There were white people, Jewish people that supported the efforts. There were, you know, white ministers as well as black ministers that was showing that we are not going to stand for this because injustice here is injustice everywhere.
Right.
And that was the key thing.
Yeah, yeah.
One of the things that I, during the course of our march, I was marching actually with Spike Lee, and there was this lady that was on the side, and she was screaming. And as closer we got, we understood what she was screaming about. And she said that she wanted people to stop killing her black brothers. And she was hysterical about it. Yeah. So I left the march and went over to the side and I gave her a hug and I whispered in her ear and I said, God is with us. Don't worry, God is with us. And she continued to scream and cry, and all of a sudden she got the message that God is with us.
Right.
And she said, okay, and stopped crying.
Yeah.
So that was really, really good, and Spike Lee thought that that was a wonderful thing that I was able to do to calm her down. And that was many things like that happened during the course of that march.
Yeah, yeah, that emotion that we don't see all the time or don't acknowledge all the time, that this is a very painful and scary period for African Americans in our history.
One of the things that also happened during the course of the march was that Dick Gregory was there in marching, and he gathered up the people that were from Ferguson, young people that were on the front lines, and they were very frustrated, and they really didn't know what to do. And he talked with them, sometimes pulling them closer to him and tapping their shoulder, and he had them surrounding him, and he was ministering to them in such a positive way. It brought tears to my eyes.
Right, yeah.
Because as old as he is, he knew that he could make a difference in trying to explain what young people should do at this time.
Right, right. There's often a lot made of the difference between the generational difference that sometimes rears its head when you get into this kind of activism, that older people like us who are of a certain generation may think that certain things make sense in terms of trying to make your point here. Younger people tend to be a little more radical about that and think that perhaps more aggressive action is appropriate, and it sounds like that was evident in the march as well.
It was, because they were so frustrated. No one had heard them, even in Ferguson or nationally. The media was beating them up, so to speak.
Sure.
And they felt, uneasy about that, and they said, what should we do? And I think Dick Gregory, in talking to them, kind of gave them an idea what they could do, and standing up and not leaning down,
right,
and keeping their shoulders strong.
Right, right. I'm wondering if you have thoughts about, marching is a big part of civil rights history. Demonstrations and things like that have brought about great change as part of a larger piece, though. Marches alone aren't really enough. What are some of the things that you think people ought to be engaged in outside of going to marches that will make a difference with regard to particularly the violence that black males are experiencing right now?
Well, one thing that I did, and I urge everybody else to do, is that I wrote the president. I wrote him a letter stating that I was sorry that the disrespect and disregard that some of the congresspeople and the senators have for him. But I told him that he needed to continue to encourage young folks to be strong like he is strong and know that they can have an opportunity to lead this country as well.
Right.
And in doing that, I didn't get a response.
Yeah.
I did that just before the march.
Right.
And I'm hopeful that other ministers and other people in the community would do a letter writing campaign. That would help in such a way that it keep people's mind very at ease.
Keep the, right, sure. What do you think about the role the president has played here? You know, he's been out front at times, not at other times, talking about this. I can think of a lot of other people I think should have bigger voices in this as well. What's your take on where he is here?
Well, I respect him so greatly, but I think that he needs to be more out front. I think that he can lead us greater, and with an effort of putting forth, coming out to the different communities and speaking with them, speaking with the young folks. I mean, that is very, very important. If you see your president in solidarity with you, that will make a difference in their lives and in the way they handle themselves.
Sure. You know, I've also thought that if President Obama were to call on more people who I think should have bigger voices in this discussion, that would be helpful too. I mean, I'm thinking of people like Deval Patrick, who was the governor of Massachusetts, a overwhelmingly white state that elected a black governor. He's had to deal with these kind of things before. Somebody like Mitch Landrieu, who was the mayor in New Orleans, a white man who was the mayor of a majority black city. Obviously, these kind of these situations and these issues come up there. Where are their voices in this in this discussion? And I think the president is the person who could probably push them to do that.
And I agree. I think that it's very important that the president come out and find different people in different communities that would be able to come back and speak with these young folks. They're very frustrated. I understand the frustration because I also seen the frustration during the time of the uprising back in '67. I seen all throughout my history of being here on this earth.
Right.
I seen young people frustrated. But I also saw some great leaders come to them and teach them.
Right.
We don't have that as much today.
It does seem like it's missing from the context, right?
Truly, truly.
Yeah.
But one of the lighter moments that as we were marching was kind of interesting. We had a lot of people taking pictures of Spike Lee, and the foreign press came up and didn't know why they were taking pictures, but they knew that.
Because they didn't recognize him.
So he thought he was famous, so they kept on encouraging him to answer, "Oh, who are you?" And so his response to just get him off his back was that, "I'm Tyler Perry."
Yeah. Well, that's right. Well, so it sounds like you had some fun too.
You know, I said, "Mookie, are you doing the right thing?"
That's right. That's right. Great that you had the opportunity to go to the march, and great that it happened. And thank you for being here today.
Well, thank you.
Absolutely. Just ahead on American Black Journal, what you need to know about heart disease in African American women. That's next, right after this look at some important moments in Detroit's Black history.
I'm Kim Trent with a look back at African American life in Detroit. This week in 1987, Aretha Franklin was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. In 1965, Little Willie John kicked off a 10-day gig at Phelps Lounge in the North End. And in 1982, Motown legend Diana Ross performed the national anthem at Super Bowl XVI in the Pontiac Silverdome. These are significant events this week in Detroit's Black history, taken from the book On This Day, African American Life in Detroit.
February is American Heart Month. As part of the effort to educate women about heart disease, the American Heart Association is hosting the Detroit Go Red for Women Luncheon, featuring Layla Ali as the keynote speaker. Heart disease is the #1 killer of women, and nearly 50,000 African American women die from the disease each year. Nearly 50% of black women ages 20 and older have heart disease, and only 50% of African African American women know the signs and symptoms of a heart attack. Here to tell us about how women can take charge of their health is Janice Cosby Bridges, who's the Chief Marketing Officer for Ascension Health Michigan, and Dr. Joan Crawford, a cardiologist at St. John Macomb Oakland Hospital. Welcome to American Black Journal. Boy, those numbers, really, that's hard to believe. I mean, you're talking about millions and millions of people who suffer from this.
Yeah, and it's not just African Americans, but it's everyone across the country.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate because, you know, we feel that cancer is the #1 disease, but heart disease, you know, it's more than any other disease.
It's bigger than
cancer. All the cancers put together.
Yeah.
So, and it's a myth, but it will kill you. I mean, it's prevalent in our community.
Right, and it is a silent killer
exactly.
of sorts, in that you could be suffering from heart disease and not really know it.
Of course.
So tell me about the dinner.
Well, the lunch.
The lunch.
It's the lunch. It is
later in the day.
Right. That's okay. We'll be celebrating all day. Right. But it's a lunch, and it's going to be held this year at the Detroit Marriott Renaissance Center. And it starts at 9 a.m. and we have all kind of workshops and raffles and all kind of things going on. And the lunch is actually at noon on February the 6th.
And what do you expect that Layla Ali is going to tell the crowd?
Well, of course, you know, Layla, I mean, she's the daughter of my hero, Muhammad Ali.
Right.
I'm a Louisville girl. I'm from Louisville, Kentucky, so I'm really excited about it.
Right.
But she, you know, she's all about health and fitness and cooking, and of course, you know, she was a champion boxer.
Sure.
So I'm sure she'll have an empowerment message, and I think that's what Go Red for Women is really all about, is just owning it and taking responsibility for your numbers, your health, changing your lifestyle, and so we can really prevent heart disease and strokes.
Yeah. Dr. Crawford, is lifestyle the major sort of lever that you need to pull to try to change the statistics here, or are there other things?
Absolutely. And the good thing about this message is that 80% of the disease is preventable.
It is, okay.
And I think, you know, we can't change our parents. Beyond that, we need to own everything we do.
So some of it is genetic. In other words, if my mother or father suffer from heart disease, I'm obviously more susceptible to that same thing. But more of it, you think, is how I live.
It's absolutely how we live. And I think one of the messages that I always try to get across to my patients is know your numbers. So I think, like you said, empowerment. I think that the patients really need to understand what is their cholesterol, what is their blood pressure, what is their weight, where are they compared to where they should be, and then try to go throughout their work day and regular day, you know, bring food to work, do things where you control your environment. And women in particular, you know, we are the leaders of our home community, and I think we really need to step up and step out and continue to educate our family, our sons and daughters, and make sure that we get that message across to them so that they start earlier, you know, being more careful with salt, food, fat, processed food, things like this. Smoking. Please quit smoking.
Right.
Yeah, please.
Right. In this community, I would imagine that there are other barriers that you face too to educating people about this. I mean, you talk about the deep poverty, particularly in the city. That makes this harder, right? Yeah,
it is harder, and I always advocate for everyone having a primary care physician because I think it starts there, because you want this, it is preventable in most cases, and I think that if you have a primary care physician, they can kind of navigate you through the healthcare maze and make sure that you have the right test, and then if anything comes up, then of course they'll send you to someone like Dr. Joan Crawford here. But I think that it is a challenge for us, especially in the African American community. But you know, if everyone has access to the internet, and if you go to goredforwomen.org, you have the tools right there to really help to educate you about heart disease and stroke.
Right. I said in the intro that most people don't know what the symptoms of a heart attack are. Tell me about that.
The most amazing statistic for women is that 2/3 of women have no symptom at all before their heart attack. So they may present with sudden cardiac death, which is why you really need to get tested ahead of time and know. But having said that, in retrospect, most people do know that they were more tired. they were more fatigued. And I think some of the symptoms, you know, every man knows center of the chest, left arm, jaw, those types of things. Half of women could have that, but women get discomfort more right in the epigastric region, between the shoulder blades in the back. It might be the right arm instead of the left arm. And many people just get tired and fatigued. So the tip I always say is, if you can't do this year or this season what you could do a few months ago, you probably need to get into your doctor and be your own advocate and ask for the EKG or ask for the stress test if you're suspicious that something's going on.
Right. How reluctant are doctors sometimes to pick up on these things?
I think because of this movement, and we call it a grassroots movement. I think because of shows like yours, you know, that help us get the word out to the masses. I think I have more patients coming in now asking for tests, saying, I'm a woman, I know it's different. I think physicians years ago were pretty terrible. They did not even think that women really had heart disease. I think the numbers for the African American community seem to be about 10 to 15 years behind where we are the general community, because I don't know why, because we're not getting to the right people and getting the message out. So thank you so much, really, for allowing us to talk about this here.
But you know, Steve, my mother died when I was 11 years old. She was 36. She died of a very rare cancer. So all of my life, I thought I was going to die of cancer, not realizing until I was educated about heart disease that
you're more
likely to die of heart disease, you know? And so that's the thing. I'm always amazed when I speak to audiences, you know, that light bulb just goes off with people. They're like, really? I mean, heart disease is really the #1 killer for women, and African American women is just off the roof, you know. So I just think that we just really need to educate everyone.
And ladies need to know there isn't one woman who wouldn't call 911 for their husband within 5 minutes of his chest pain. The average length of time a woman takes to get to the emergency room is 12 hours.
Because they don't recognize the...
They think it's a gallbladder attack. They think it's indigestion. They think they have to pack their children's
It's a bad
lunch.
day.
It's a bad,
It's just a bad day.
They have something they have to do for the kids that
night.
Right. So they just can't seem to take the time for themselves.
What effect do you feel like the Affordable Care Act is having on this particular issue, both in terms of education and in terms of care?
Well, for me, hopefully, I think that more people, because they have care, they have a primary care physician.
More people have primary care
physicians, and they're not going to the ERs as often. I hope, you know, presenting themselves. And sometimes, you know, the ER is an ER. It's for emergent care, and you know, it's not preventative care. And hopefully, you know, with the Affordable Care Act, that more people are getting the care that they need. And they're, again, you know, they're learning more about
just
their
that
bodies.
relationship with primary care.
And you know, it's not that scary. You know, we stress out about, you know, waiting and waiting and waiting, but if we get in early, you know, hopefully it's more preventable.
The thing I'd like to add is I still think many people don't have insurance. And so I find myself educating people often. I'd like to say it here. If you don't have a doctor, even if you go to a doctor once a year and it takes the rest of that year at $10 a month to pay off that office visit, if you have hypertension or if you have a problem like that, the generic drugs at several different places are only $5 a month. And many people really think they can't afford healthcare.
They can't afford it, sure.
What you can't afford is to have a stroke or to have something like that. And strokes are one of the #1 killers as well. It's part of cardiovascular disease.
I was going to ask you about that. Is that what's the relationship between heart disease and stroke?
It's there, and the African American community is some of the #1 people that have higher amounts of high blood pressure and higher amounts of stroke and higher amounts of, unfortunately, untreated people. You get high blood pressure and maybe you think you're not going to like the side effects of the drugs, and I think people just aren't educated to understand how important taking the medicine is and being compliant with the medication to avoid the long-term, down-the-road major problems.
What are some of the things that, if you're looking forward, it seems like every year I do a show about this problem, and it's both on the education and on the care side. How do we get to the point where I don't have to do this show?
Well, we have a long way to go. I'm going to be here for years and years to come then. You know what, it's getting better. I think more and more people are learning about heart disease. And fortunately, I just learned that where stroke used to be the fourth highest disease, and now it's moved to fifth.
It's moving
so
down.
it's moving down. So that's good, but I just think it's about education, 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 and you know, people kind of opening up their minds to it, because again, it's amazing. People just don't get that it's the #1 killer. So.
And I think as we're so busy, so many people stop at a store and get prepackaged food, you know, the days of taking the time to have a family meal and not eating out. So it always goes back to the basics: salt restriction, exercise, staying active, and getting involved. And the statistics are amazing. People that get involved with the Go Red,
the numbers,
we actually find that the women, because you know you're out talking about this, so they try to trim down, lose weight, they're taking better care of themselves. So sometimes just getting active in the organization, not necessarily donating money, but time, and getting out there to help educate, it helps.
Well, great to have you guys here. You're both wearing your red, I see. That's perfect. All right. That's our program for today. Thanks for watching. You can get more information about our guests at AmericanBlackJournal.org. And as always, connect with us on Facebook and on Twitter. Plus, you can now hear episodes of American Black Journal on WDET 101.9 FM. We'll see you next time.
At DTE Energy, we believe that we have a greater responsibility. We believe that being part of a community means being involved in the fabric of that community, investing time, effort, and resources in the communities we serve. DTE Energy Foundation is a proud sponsor of American Black Journal.